With rare plants such as the Delta Force Anthurium coming into tissue culture, and nearly all houseplants found at big box stores being produced from tissue culture, from fiddly figs to Thai Constellation monsteras, it should almost be assumed that your plant is from tissue culture in your house, unless it's something super rare. But since tissue culture has the ability to change the genetics of a plant for better, like creating yellow bell peppers, spineless pineapples, and thornless blackberries, or for worse, changing the genetics so that the plant is more susceptible to disease or rot and its ability to fight pests. This begs the question, should tissue culture plants be disclosed as being from tissue culture? Or maybe, should they be disclosed as not being from tissue culture because TC is so prevalent in the houseplant market? Tissue culture has tons of benefits. It tends to bring the price down immediately of a plant by flooding the market with supply, as well as it decreases poaching in the natural habitat, typically in Asia or in Latin America. This story first came to me when reached out to me and was bringing up the Anthurium Delta Force, which is in tissue culture. As some of you know, the Rare Plant Fairy has been selling Anthurium Delta Force for about $800 or $900. And this has been a multi-$1,000 plant for the last few years. So I got a screenshot of an email sent to the Rare Plant Fairy inquiring whether or not the plant was a clone. So we're going to get into a bit of the minutia of what a clone means and why it's important to distinguish whether or not something is from tissue culture, because there's something called Somalclonal variation, which changes the genetics of the plant based on a whole bunch of different things. And if you guys want to research it, there's tons of cool YouTube videos that explain the deep science of somalclonal variation, but we're not going to get into that today. Just know it has the ability to change the genetics of a plant. And this is many times used by plant labs instead of GMO and genetically modifying an organism because it's typically cheaper and there's less regulation around it. So the potential buyer reaches out and says, "Hello, I'm super interested in purchasing one of your Delta Force Anthuriums. I'm curious to know, do you have the lineage of the Delta Force plant? Are they TC from the original Delta Force plant, clone, or seedling? Thank you for your time." And they reply, the Rare Plant Fairy replies, "Hello, they are cloned from the original RG Delta, RG being Ree Gardens." And it's worth mentioning that Delta Force is a hybrid of two different Anthuriums. But this is very tricky language, and I think RPF, Rare Plant Fairy, made a mistake here. So technically, when you first do TC, it should be an exact clone of the mother plant. But if you do it for too long, you can experience something like what happened in Thai Constellation, and the genetics of that plant can actually degrade and make it more susceptible to things such as we found, like root rot. Whether or not the plant had pythium in it or not, it just made it more susceptible to things like stem and root rot. But as I said, a lot of cool things have come out of somalclonal variation, like drought-resistant carrots, fungus-resistant strawberries, but the opposite can occur also, like fungus-susceptible strawberries. So that's why you should want to know whether or not your plant came from TC or not. So to give Rare Plant Fairy the benefit of the doubt, I reached out to them and asked, "Hey there, I'm wondering if you can tell me if the Anthurium Delta Force are produced from tissue culture or from stem cutting or division. Thanks so much." Now, I was very particular in giving them the options of like, let's be clear that it's either tissue culture or stem cutting. I get that they're all under propagation, but TC has the ability to change genetics. So we can't just say they're just clones. So Sean replies and says the ones currently listed on our website are tissue cultured from an original Ree Gardens mother. So awesome that they gave the truthful response there, but you have to be very careful in how you specify these questions, because I guess technically, if you say, are they clones, technically they are clones, but they're not stem cuttings. That's how I would be very specific. So someone in DM asked, "Hey, the two Delta Force on the site, are they clones or selfies?" Because again, it's a hybrid. "Hello, they're clones." And the person replies, "You guys should be really honest here. There's a big difference between being a clone from the original plant and being a cutting or an offset and it being TC. You guys have people believing that the plants you're selling is a direct cut or an offset from the original Delta Force. And that is a very big distinction. This is true. You should be upfront and honest with people and let them know that this is a tissue culture plant of the original Delta Force plant." And I agree. And they reply, "We appreciate your feedback, but your assertion that there is a big difference between being a cutting from an original plant and a TC of that cutting is not scientifically accurate." Wrong. Rare Plant Fairy is wrong here, or Sean is wrong here. TC is a method of cloning in sterile lab conditions. If a cutting from the original is cloned via TC, then the result is genetically identical to the original. This is incorrect. If you guys want to get really nerdy, go down the rabbit holes, type into something like ResearchGate or Google Scholar, Somalclonal variation. You can read all about how people change the genetics and get something such as lack of chlorophyll even, or lack of photosynthetic ability, which is exactly what happened in this yellow bell pepper. Going back and forth with Rare Plant Fairy and talking to this person that reached out to them, I pulled you guys and I asked, should tissue culture plants be disclosed in their listings for sale? Does it matter if they come from TC? And 35% of you said no, it shouldn't be disclosed, and 65% said yes. And a bunch of you guys said, I don't care / I don't know why people care. And I think you should care because it can change and degrade the genetics, especially if we're talking about really expensive plants. Now, if we're talking about something simple like this Joepii that I grew from TC, also, I kept these in the propagation gel media for a really long time where they were exposed to a bunch of the plant growth hormones, the rooting hormone, and I got green on green variegation in about 8 or so of the plants, of about a few hundred. So that is exactly somalclonal variation. I've seen it for my own eyes. And also, just anecdotally, I have a Spiritus Sancti in TC and it's starting to variegate. It's putting a yellow stripe through the middle of the plant. So TC has the ability to decrease prices, yes, and it decreases poaching, but it can change the genetics of the plant. But hey, if you don't care about it, that's totally fine to you. But these are maybe some of the reasons why you might want to care. A lot of the answers were great and really pointed out, like, I just kind of want to know because it's a cool process. And I agree. We call TC in our shop Harry Potter magic because it's literally hard to believe that it actually works and how it works. But if you subject something to a lot of hormones, which regulates really everything, even in humans, it's amazing what it can actually do to plants. Now, of course, I kind of wasn't referring to like if it's in a gel bag, which is obviously TC, it's, kind of goes without saying, but I meant if it's a bigger plant, should it be, dictated that it is TC? And it also brings up a good point, which someone brought up in the comments. It could be a fully grown plant like this, or we've got a 5-foot Thai Constellation over here, and that was from tissue culture. But if you take an offset of that plant, should that be described to be as TC? And it's also mostly made it through that kind of issue of where the genes could be degraded, and it could be made a case that that's actually a stronger plant and one of the good ones that survived with those kind of beneficial genetic changes, if any at all. It could actually be a genetic exact copy of the mother, but that's not always the case. And then this is kind of what I said in the start of the video. Not necessarily. It's safe to assume that most plants are TC unless specified otherwise. That's pretty much my answer. Even plants that were grown from seed or propagated could have a parent plant that was from TC. Absolutely true. And a couple people asked, why wouldn't I want to disclose that? TC tends to go for cheaper than like butt cuts or offsets or divisions of plants because most of us tend to value TC a little bit less than other typical cuttings. And almost all houseplants like in Home Depot or Lowe's or big box stores are from TCs, with the exception of Monstera deliciosa and really large plants that can't fit in vials very well or have really large stems tend to not be from TC. Things like snake plants that are mostly grown in Central America and then sent up to us as like the chunks of the rhizomes, those aren't from TC also. But almost every other plant you can buy in a tray of liners, for like peace lily I've grown out from TC. You can buy almost all ficus from TC. It's really the way how we produce millions and millions of plants in the US and all around the world. I love that most of you said, or many of you said, like, I don't care, it just doesn't matter to me as long as I'm getting a healthy, beautiful plant. I think that as long as they are healthy plants, and mostly we've seen the issues be in beneath the 4-inch size. So if you're buying a plant in the 4-inch pot size and above, there's almost no issue, to be sure. And if anything, it'll be a cool issue like green on green variegation or some sort of interesting genetic change. But I've seen like Paraiso verdes, when they're small, just completely like melt away in our greenhouse with no like understanding as to why it happened. They'll just be like melted in the pot. Same definitely with Thai Constellation. If you guys want to look up the thread where people are going back and forth about the Anthurium Delta Force, check out Anthurium Addicts, the Facebook group. People were going back and forth a lot about this topic. And a really interesting thread I'll leave you guys with, which someone is asking that they're looking at buying a Delta Force TC, and they're saying, do you think the TC version will adopt the same characteristics of the Delta Force? And many people say that they should have the same genetics, but again, no one's bringing up Somalclonal variation. And there's also some thoughts that people are saying that fake Delta Force TC, which I think people are just kind of being haters and spreading misinformation. It's pretty easy to like buy a butt cut of an Anthurium and bring it into tissue culture. It just takes some months and a lot of money. And Justin Jones points out it should be the same, but there are ways to introduce mutation. There he did mention the Somalclonal variation into tissue culture depending on the method used. Absolutely. And then this is like middle of this past year, so like May or June, someone asked, that makes me wonder why someone hasn't done some TC magic to put a Delta Force that's going for like $4,000 into TC. And Jocelyn Ho of the Rare Plant Fairy responds, it takes a lot of guts to hack up an $8,000 plant and put it into TC. It absolutely does. And it sounds like that's exactly what Jocelyn and RPF has done, which kudos to them. But at the same time, you should bring up that it's grown from TC, or if it's a stem cutting or division of a plant. Because that stem cutting, when you just cut off a chunk of the plant with a growth point and some roots, the chances of cells mutating are very, very low without exposing it to harsh chemicals or plant growth regulators. And Jocelyn goes into the massive investment which it takes to tissue culture a really expensive plant. And this is absolutely true. And this is pretty much exactly what happened to Thai Constellation. And it was just overproduced, and that degraded the genetics of this plant. So if we do repeated multiplication of something like Delta Force, the genetics will weaken and dilute, and it can potentially become a weaker plant. It's also possible that one of those little X plants that you grow out will be much stronger and vigorous than the rest. But in most of the cases, they will be genetic copies of the mother plant, but not always. So you guys let me know down in the comments what you think. Does this change your perspective after me putting out the poll and this video on whether or not you care about it being from TC? I'm personally really excited to see more rare plants like Delta Force come into tissue culture and stay in tissue culture and have it be replicated more and more so that the prices come down and that I can get one for $100 or $200. That's when houseplants become fun and accessible, not when they're $1,000. But also there's a slippery slope of overproducing it, over multiplying it, and then having really weak, poor genetics of a plant. So I hope you guys learned something new. If you did, please click the subscribe button down below. Over 70% of you aren't subscribed when you're watching these videos, and that makes me super sad. You should definitely subscribe and click the like button down below because we make one video about houseplants every week. Thank you so much for watching. We'll see you next week.